Okay, let's get started. We've all heard the term, the chosen people. And today we want to explore a little bit deeper what that means. So my first question to you is, how do you feel about being chosen? If somebody calls you a member of the chosen nation, how does that make you feel?
I think it's to a degree a sense of pride, but it's also something that you shouldn't be arrogant about.
Okay. So it's something that we are proud of, but it shouldn't lead to arrogance.
Right.
So we're conscious of that, right?
And you have a duty to a certain degree with dealing with people, because others might view it as something negative or, yeah,
Right.
something negative.
Not like it's something I ever had a choice about. I didn't do
Or
anything to do it.
you didn't choose to be chosen?
Nah, I just happened to be born to a Jewish mother.
So the question was, how does that make you feel?
Like I have responsibility, even though the original choice wasn't up to me.
Okay. So I'm going to give you an extreme example, which, we talk about the Nazis, may their name be erased. They were famously, they believed in the superiority of the Aryan race. And it led to extreme arrogance. It led to discrimination and policies against others, which helped them justify genocide and the Holocaust. So obviously, being chosen in the Jewish sense does not mean feeling superior to others because of our status, and therefore we have the right to look down on others. I don't know of any Jews that practice genocide because they feel superior to others. But what does it mean from the Jewish perspective, from the Torah's perspective, to be chosen? And why doesn't it lead to discrimination or chauvinism if we feel that we are the chosen people? So we have a very interesting verse in this week's Torah portion, which is Kitavo. The Torah says, as he promised, God selected you this day to be his treasured people. In Hebrew, Am Segula, and so that you will observe all his commandments. So the first part, I understand. God selected you to be his treasured people. But what does it mean? He chose us, and therefore we have to observe his commandments. Seemingly, if you are selected for a high position, if you are selected for, you volunteer to do something, normally it's not, I'm choosing you so that you can now serve me. Right? Imagine an entertainer gets up on a stage and asks for a volunteer, and you raise your hand, you go up to the stage to volunteer, and he says, okay, go to the kitchen and wash the dishes. Yeah, I didn't expect to be chosen for that. So we all know the famous scene in Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye looks up to the heavens and declares, I know that we are the chosen people, but once in a while, God, can't you choose someone else? So what does it mean that God is choosing us and then giving us the responsibilities to serve him by observing all his commandments? Obviously, these two ideas are connected. The question is how. So once we understand the nature of being a treasured people, and why that chosenness is selected by God, then we'll understand why it can never lead to arrogance or being haughty or racist, God forbid. Because being chosen doesn't mean that we're masters of the world. It means that we're the servants of God, right? We're not chosen to lord it over others, to stick our noses up and act superior. We're chosen to serve. There's a Talmudic tale of two brilliant students in the academy of Rabban Gamliel. And when Rabban Gamliel, the head of the academy, learned that they were impoverished, they had no clothing, no food, he decided to give them a paid position at the head of the academy. And they declined. They decided, they heard that they're going to be appointed to a leadership position, and they said, no thanks. So he sends them back a message. But here's the Talmudic passage. He summons them. They didn't arrive. He summons them again, and they come, and he says to them, do you think I'm appointing you to a position of mastery? It's a position of servitude to which I appoint you. In other words, just because I'm making you leaders, right? They thought becoming leaders means that we have to rule over others. No, he says positions of leadership is a position of servitude. You're there to serve others. So it sounds like a very titled position. I'm choosing you. But what are we chosen for? We're selected to serve. And that's not an elitist thing. If I'm chosen to serve others, then it doesn't make me elitist. What were we chosen for? As we said earlier, we're chosen to observe all of God's commandments. And of course, there are additional responsibilities that come together with that chosenness, with that title. Earlier in the book of Exodus, in Yitro, when God gives us the Torah at Mount Sinai, we have a similar passage where it says, if you obey me and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasure out of all peoples, for the entire earth belongs to me. Excuse me. And you'll be my kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So we see here two conditions for being chosen. The first we know already is to obey God and observe his commandments. The second is a new addition, verse 6, that you will be my kingdom of priests and a holy nation. What does this mean? So we're going to explore two classic commentators on this verse to help us appreciate what this is referring to. What does it mean when God designates us as his kingdom of priests and a holy nation? So we first turn to Sforno. Rabbi Ovadia Sforno lived in the 15th, 16th century. He was, besides being a biblical commentator, he was also a physician and a philosopher. He was born in Italy and later on founded a yeshiva and one of the most famous commentators on the Torah. And this is how Sforno explains this verse. What does it mean that we're expected to be a kingdom of princes and a holy nation? Says Rabbi Ovadia Sforno. He says, to teach and guide humanity to invoke God's name and serve him as one. So Jews are not the only people on earth that have a divine mandate to serve God. Because in fact, we share this with all humanity. All people are supposed to serve God. It's true that other nations have 7 laws called the Noahide laws, and we Jews have 613. But that's not what we're talking about. It's not that there's a difference in number. They have 7, we have 613. So we're more glorified servants than they are. Our task is to teach and guide humanity so that they will recognize that they're also here to serve God. It's not just the Jews that are chosen to serve God. Our role is to teach others and the rest of humanity, non-Jews, that they are meant to serve God, to teach them monotheism, to teach morality, to teach that there's a divine purpose behind everything, and that each individual human being is endowed with a divine spark and sent here for a particular purpose. We're the messengers to bring this message to all people. And not just to preach it, but to practice it, to believe it, to be a living example of what it means to serve God. So the mitzvahs that God gives us, the instructions for how to lead a godly life, are allowing us to fulfill our role as teachers and guides for the rest of humanity. Famously, the prophet Isaiah said that we are an or lagoyim, a light unto the nations. And for the most part, if you think about it, we have succeeded in this task. Billions of people believe in God. And not only that, but even if you look at Western civilization, the central tenets of democracy are based on the fundamental principles of our faith: the sanctity of life, the centrality of education, the prominence of family, equality before the law. These are all values that have been embraced by the wider society. Where do they come from? They come from Judaism. And non-Jews have recognized this. Non-Jews, many prominent non-Jewish thinkers have written about the Jewish people's role as teachers, bringing wisdom and enlightenment to the world. Just to cite one example, there's a book by Thomas Cahill, who wrote The Gifts of the Jews. And he writes, this is a non-Jewish writer. He writes, we are the undeserving recipients of the history of the Jews, this long, excessive, miraculous development of ethical monotheism, without which our ideas of equality and personalism are unlikely ever to have come into being, and surely would never have matured in the way they have. Unbelievers might wish to stop for a moment and consider how completely God undergirds all our values, and that it is just possible that human effort without this God is doomed to certain failure. And he calls it the Jewish God of justice and compassion. Humanity's most extravagant dreams are articulated by the Jewish prophets. In Isaiah's vision, true faith is no longer confined to one nation, but all the nations stream to the house of God, that he may teach us his way, and that we may learn to beat our swords into plowshares. So this is a non-Jew who recognizes the gifts of the Jews to the world. So the question becomes, if we're so successful that we've managed to communicate and to teach the rest of humanity these morals and ethics and values, why doesn't the success get to our heads and make us feel superior to others? Why don't we find frequently Jews discriminating against others because we feel, look at us, look what we've accomplished. And so the obvious answer is that we remind ourselves why we're chosen. We're chosen to teach and to inspire others to believe that they are unique, that every human being is unique, because God treasures everyone, not just the Jews. As the Sepharna continues, he says, "You shall be my treasure out of all peoples." Humanity is more precious to me than all the lower creatures, because the purpose of creation is fulfilled through them. Indeed, our sages of blessed memory taught, "Beloved are humans, for they were created in God's image." That's from Pirkei Avot. "Nevertheless, among them you will be my primary treasure." So the Torah could have said, "You will be my treasure." But it doesn't just stop there. It says, "You'll be my treasure from among the nations." That indicates that we are a treasure among treasures. Yes, we were given a special task. We were chosen to be ambassadors, you might say treasures in chief, to serve the other treasures. How? By teaching them that they are treasures, by reminding them that they have a role to play in God's world, that every human being is a divine gem. And sometimes we have to kind of polish that gem, and we have to be there to remind them that they have the potential to glow like a gem. But that's our task. So of course, when we are conscious of this, there's no way that's going to lead to feeling elitist and superior over others. If our role is to help others feel special because God chose them as his treasure, we're there to uplift them, to raise them up, not to rule over them. And that's the reason why I don't find Jews feeling superior and discriminating against others, because of their status as the chosen people. Because our role is to raise others up, to uplift them, and to remind them that they are God's treasures.
Rabbi,
Yes.
we've seen that in some of the some things like Jewish people being involved in the civil rights movement. I can remember reading about what Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said when he marched with Dr. Martin Luther King at Selma. He said, "I felt like my feet were praying." And we've been involved with, other, Jews have been involved with many other things to help uplift the world, like taking care of the environment, and, that's, and helping out other countries. Like I can remember many years ago when there was that tragedy in Haiti, and Israel was down there. Israel is often first on the spot for international disasters, and
That's true. That's very true. And so the fact that we have been able to practice this role, to uplift others, is because we were chosen. And based on what we're saying, according to the Sepharda commentary, that's what it means to be God's treasured nation. So that's the first perspective, that there's something that we share with all of humanity, And even though we are taking a leading role in showing others the way, but there's an element of chosenness that is common to all, that is universal. But now let's get a little deeper into this. There is another element of chosenness, which is unique to Jews, that we don't share with others. And that is that there's a part of our soul, we call it a divine soul or a godly soul. And what does that mean? That God chose to give a sliver of himself to us. That's what makes us Jewish, right? And although every human being has a soul, which is a spiritual gift capable of fulfilling their purpose and mission as given to them by God, but the Jew received something in addition to that, in addition to the regular soul element that all people share. There's a spark of God that is unique to the Jew. That's what makes the Jewish people chosen on a deeper level. And that's what makes us unique and sets us apart. Where do we see this? So let's look at some of the classical sources. The Midrash says, the souls of the righteous sat with the King of all kings, the Holy One, blessed be he, and he consulted them before creating his world. So let's go back to before creation. God has a vision. God envisions creating a world, and he sees already the Jew. He envisions placing a sliver of himself inside the Jew and receives a certain pleasure from that. That tells us that the soul of the Jew preceded creation. In other words, even before our bodies existed, our souls were in place. How did they exist if only God existed? Well, that's the answer. They were a part of God. So the world, as we know it, is defined as creation. The soul precedes and transcends creation because it's part of the Creator. So the Jew has a part of the Creator inside his soul. Before creation, there was no humanity to inspire and to teach. So everything we said until now about the role of the Jews chosen to teach others happened only after creation. Before creation, there were no gems to polish. There was only God. So that means that we have a role or part of our chosenness precedes creation. What were we chosen for? To be part of to be given a part of God himself. And we're going to explain what that means. So Rashi, the great commentator, when the Torah talks about the Jewish nation being God's treasure, this is how Rashi puts it. He says, a beloved treasure like the treasures of kings. As kings store costly vessels and precious stones in their secret treasure houses, so will you be a treasure to me from among the nations. Now, this is a little hard for us to relate to because we're not living in a monarchy system. We don't really have kings today, real kings. So what does this mean? What is the point of an ancient king holding on to a treasure in a secret vault that enriches the nation? What's the point? So normally the treasures that the king has, we say, is going to enrich the nation. The larger the treasure house, the greater army the king could maintain, the more glory he could achieve for his country, and the more prosperous the economy it would be. Then you have the royal jewels, like the crown jewels, that are only displayed once in a while in order to showcase the power and the wealth of the throne. But what is the point of maintaining a secret, a private collection that no one will ever see? The answer is that these treasures, these gems, don't serve the kingdom. They serve the king. They enhance the prestige of the king himself. So back in the old days, when you thought of a king, the king represented somebody with more power or wealth than anyone else. The king was the absolute ruler, even above the law. They say that the decline of kingship began when bankers were more wealthy than kings. Kings had to borrow money from bankers to conduct their wars. But in the old days, the king was the top, was supreme, and the perception was that he has unlimited access to wealth, to money, to treasures. Nothing. There's no limit. So this notion of the king having this private collection of treasures wasn't to enhance the kingdom. It was simply to enhance the king's own prestige. As the Rebbe says, the king's hidden treasures don't enhance the kingdom. They're part of the king himself. His kingship is tied to having hidden treasures of diamonds and gems to enjoy and in which to delight. This truly exalts the king. It elevates him intrinsically. Okay, so now that we know this metaphor, what does that tell us about ourselves? If we could trace our roots back to the origin, we would find that we are literally a part of God. And that's what it means to be chosen about others. Chosen, God chose us. God chose the Jewish people for a specific purpose. But it's not about us. It's about the role that we play to enhance God. It's really, ultimately, it's about God. His choosing us enhances his prestige as the King of Kings. So knowing, for all other nations to know that God has, as part of his treasure house, he has the Jewish people, right? And he gave them a part of him, a sliver of himself. He gave it to them. That is a whole new appreciation of our chosenness. So according to Sforno, what does it mean to be chosen? It's to enhance the prestige of the kingdom. In other words, when we play our role to polish the king's gems, and we teach other human beings their unique value, automatically God's creation is enhanced. Rashi comes from a different perspective. Rashi says that it's not about enhancing creation, it's about enhancing the creator. It's about a treasure that's part of God himself that no human eye will ever see, is something which allows the prestige of the king himself, of God himself, to be elevated. That's what Rashi says. Now, It's true that this is unique to the Jew, that other nations were not given this dimension of the soul, this godly soul. But again, why is it not elitist to say that we have something that nobody else has? Because it's available to anyone who wants it. You really want to be part of God's chosen nation? There, you can choose the path of conversion, right? Adam said before that he wasn't chosen, he didn't choose to be Jewish. He was born to a Jewish mother. But there is another way to assume a full-fledged Jewish identity, and that is to be a Jew by choice. So a person who chooses to convert to Judaism receives that very same Jewish soul, that sliver of God himself, right? And therefore, it's not saying this is we're this exclusive club that nobody can join. We asked earlier why being chosen comes with a requirement to serve, right? According to Seforno, it makes sense. Because if our whole reason for being chosen is to teach others, to serve others, how to teach others how to serve God, then we need to lead by example. And the commandments that God gave us are tools for how to lead a godly lifestyle so that we can teach others. But if we follow the explanation of Rashi, who says that there's something intrinsic, a part of God that's inside the Jew, that's what makes us chosen, then we come back to our original question. If there's a part of God inside of us, then why do we have to serve God? We are royalty. A part of the king is inside of us. So we should have servants to serve. Why are we the servants? So the answer is that if we truly understand what it means to be a part of God, to live in a godly way, then there is no other way to live other than serving God. In other words, it becomes intrinsic to our nature. A sliver of God doesn't have interest in material pleasures, in music, sports, art, social things, all of these things that are meaningful to the body are not so meaningful to the soul. A part of God has no interest in materialism. So being chosen to have a part of God inside of us will automatically translate into a lifestyle of godliness. That's why we were chosen to observe the commandments. There is no other way to live other than living a life that God desires. That's who we are. That's part of our DNA. We wouldn't want it any other way. In the Rebbe's words, this is why our service is in the manner of to observe all his commandments. That Jews follow 613 mitzvahs, not just 7, as Noahides do. And this is not just a quantitative difference. They have 7, we have 613, so we have more commandments. Rather, it's a qualitative difference. The observance of non-Jews is limited by the number of commandments and tasks they are assigned. The observance of Jews, who are one, as it were, with God's core and essence, is beyond any measure or limitation. Since God and his will are one, a Jew who is one with God is devoted and committed to God's will. So, if a person has interests outside of God, right? Then I look at it that I'm serving God out of a duty. I have a sense of obligation. I have responsibilities. But somebody whose entire life, entire existence is connected to God because there's a part of God inside of them, doesn't ask this question. Because what else would I want other than to serve God? If God wants me to rest on Shabbos, then of course I'm going to rest on Shabbos. There's no other option. I have no interest in doing anything other than what God wants me to do. There's only one thing. If God wants Shabbos to be observed, then that's what I want, because I am one with God. So it's not that we fulfill the mitzvahs, we fulfill God's commandments because we've been ordered to do so. And they're sometimes burdens or obligations. We observe the mitzvahs because this is our deepest desire. We're chosen to have a part of God inside of us. And therefore, our essence, our deepest wish is to do whatever God wants. Without that, I have my life, I'll live my life, and I'll dedicate some time to God. I recognize that God is the creator. Very nice. So to pay my allegiance to God who created me and gave me life, I'll set aside some time in my schedule to devote to God. But the rest of the time, leave me alone. I'm going to tend to my own affairs. A person who is endowed with a godly soul doesn't have their own needs independent of God's needs. Everything that I do is part of God's will because that's my life purpose. And that's the connection, according to the explanation of Rashi, for why being chosen as God's treasure leads us to observing the commandments. So God chose non-Jews to observe certain commandments. God chooses Jews not just to observe more commandments, but to be vehicles through whom God's will is fulfilled all the time, 24/7. So now that we're talking about this very special, exclusive part of God being invested into us, we ask the same question again. Okay, so if that's so special, why wouldn't that knowledge lead the Jew to be elitist and feel superior to others? According to Sforno, I understand, because if we're chosen to show the rest of humanity, to teach the rest of humanity how special they are, then our chosenness doesn't make us elitist or feel superior to others. But according to Rashi, he's going a step further and he's saying that we're intrinsically superior to the rest of humanity because nobody else has this sliver of God inside of them. Seemingly, that should lead the Jew to being haughty, to feeling arrogant. Look at me. I'm better than you. Look what I have. You don't have it. Now, it's true that anyone could have it if they choose to convert to Judaism, but until they convert, we have something they don't. So why doesn't that lead to a feeling of superiority or elitism?
Rabbi,
Yes.
doesn't it humble us to have that responsibility rather than making us feel superior?
Very good. Very good. So this is the key. The key word here is humility. When you are promoted at the office, and now you can have access to executive meetings, you have more prestige, you feel accomplished because you just became a senior partner in the company. So you have a position of authority. The more access we have to power, the more arrogant we become. But when we come face to face with true greatness, then it makes us feel small. It doesn't make us feel better than others. It makes us feel humble. Here's a quote by Lisa Gerber, who wrote about the feeling of being humbled by nature. She writes, to function, humility needs a reality greater than ourselves, a reality that inspires awe. Nature, in its beauty, complexity, and vastness, does afford us a sense of the sacred and profane. Nature is complex, intricate, spontaneous. Think of the migration of geese or the sunrise. Visit the Grand Canyon or walk among the exposed and open rock of southern Utah. Late at night, look up and watch the stars. Or during spring, crouch and watch a bean sprout coming out of the ground. At some point, you'll stop and say, wow, this is incredible, beautiful, amazing. To fail to see this, to fail to be moved by the awe-inspiring qualities of nature, is to lack humility. We understand humility through the awe-inspiring qualities the virtuous person can see. Humility comes from contact with a greater, more complex reality. That is, a person stands before something that inspires awe. So this is the reason why somebody who is fortunate enough to experience the beauty of God's nature doesn't come away with a feeling of greatness where they want to control others. You're humbled and you want to share this gift with the world. You have a certain appreciation for something much larger than yourself. And that leads to a feeling of humility. There's an astronomer. Oh, sorry, there was an astronaut, Frank Borman, who wrote about his experience of standing on the moon and looking down on Earth. He says, when you're finally up in the moon and you're looking down on Earth, all those differences and nationalistic traits are pretty well going to blend, and you're going to get a concept that maybe this really is one world. Why can't we just learn to live together like decent people? So it gives you a certain perspective, right? When you're come into contact with the beauty of nature, right? It's humbling. You don't care about the size of your bank account or how prestigious you are. You don't think about your power and your authority. You become more real and authentic because you've come in face to face with greatness. Now, if this is true when it comes to witnessing God's brushstrokes, just visiting the Grand Canyon and seeing the brushstroke is an encounter with greatness, imagine how impactful it would be when a person comes face to face with God, the creator of nature. How much more humbling of an experience that would be. You have this large planet that's so beautiful, but from the astronaut's perspective, it's a speck, it's a tiny speck in the universe. Imagine not only catching a glimpse of God's creation, but catching a glimpse of the Creator himself. Would that lead to ego? Would that lead to arrogance? Of course not. It leads to an awe-inspired humility. Like it says here, true greatness tends to humble. And absolute greatness humbles absolutely. So when a person experiences the hand of God in their life and recognizes that this is truly something that only God could accomplish, that leads to a sense of humility. The opposite of arrogance. Just to cite an example, the Alter Rebbe, who was the founder of Chabad, was imprisoned in Tsarist Russia back in 1799 on charges that were trumped up by his opponents, his ideological opponents, fellow Jews. And several weeks later, when his innocence was established, he was released. So many of his followers were tempted to, take revenge, get back at these people who had manufactured the false charges against the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe wrote a letter to them, and he explained that to do that would miss the entire point of God's kindness. He said, we ought to become exceedingly humble with every kindness that God bestows upon us. For kindness is God's right arm, and his right arm embraces me. In kindness, God draws us close to him, far closer than ever before. And those brought exceedingly close to God, raised aloft to great heights, must be ever humbler to the lowliest plane. As Jeremiah says, from afar has God appeared to me. And as is known, all that is before him is esteemed as nothing. Hence, the closer one is to God, the more like nothing, naught, and non-existent one becomes. So if you're going to get close to the mayor or the governor or the president, it's going to make you feel proud and haughty. Look at me, I was invited to the White House. But if you're drawn close to God and you come face to face with true greatness, the only proper response is humility. Because true greatness is all-consuming. So the Alter Rebbe said to his followers, we have just witnessed an open miracle, God's kindness. God's drawn us close to him. Don't choose to lord over your detractors. Respond with humility. Love them as only God would. And that is why this answers our question of why the fact that we were chosen, we were given a sliver of God inside of us, does not lead to a feeling of arrogance or elitism, because that's only when you experience artificial superiority. But when you encounter true greatness and you recognize that a part of God is in you, you are part of God, the only possible response to that is a feeling of humility. And this is the reason why being called the chosen people has not led us to bigotry, God forbid, discrimination against others. Because number one, as we said, we were chosen to lift others up, to show each and every human being the beauty that God has endowed them with, to be a gemstone, a God-given gift to this world. And number two, as Jews, we have been given a gift, a sliver of godliness has been placed into our soul. And when we recognize that, we feel humbled. So we are reminding ourselves of what it means to be a part of the chosen people. That number one, the world needs us. We have to be the moral leaders and teach the rest of humanity their divine potential and strength to serve God. Therefore, we have to rise up to what God expects us to do in that regard. And the second is to understand that what makes us special should really make us feel humble. The greatest Torah scholars were people who were marked by humility, because the closer we are to God, the more humble we become. And it's impossible to feel elitist over others when you're standing before God. So this is our privilege and responsibility to be chosen, and to be chosen for greatness, to be one with God. We feel humbled by this, by being designated as God's treasure, God-chosen people. And it's up to us to fulfill our role, our purpose and mission individually, collectively, until the world will be filled with the knowledge of God, with the coming of Mashiach and the transformation of the world to a place of true peace. Any questions?
Well, Rabbi, I was going to say earlier when you were talking about how we are royalty, isn't it comparable to, like like you have the King of England, and you have his sons. Well, they're royalty, but they represent him, in a lot of stuff and everything. So isn't that kind of the same, similar to what? Yeah, we're, Prince William, for example, is royal, but he represents his father. So, in a lot of instances. So, similarly, if I may say that, we're royalty, but we're representing Hashem on earth.
Yes, correct. That's why it says princes. You're selected to be God's princes and a holy nation. A kingdom of priests and a holy nation, right? Any other thoughts or comments?
Great class. I have a question that has nothing to do with this. It's just a practical question. I don't know. I should ask it when other people were on here, but just trying to figure out for the event a couple of weeks ago if any of it was tax deductible as I do my numbers.
Yeah, we'll talk about that offline, okay?
Okay. Yeah. You can just send me an email or something. Quick
Okay.
question. Yep.
Okay. Anything else on the topic that we're talking about? Okay. Sophia.
I just wanted to share that I have discovered a very special teacher. His name is Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik. He's a PhD in many areas. He's like a brilliant guy, and he just did a course. He studied monarchy so that we could understand how monarchy in the planet Earth functioned, and the awe of kingship, so we can have any kind of relevance. Because today we don't have that. Even the queen, didn't have physical power to kill. But it's a recent endeavor. So when we compare the word king, we don't quite understand. So he did like a study, and I recommend strongly to search him up. His name is Meir Soloveichik. He's a grandson of the famous dynasty. And he studied that to give us a glimpse of what kingship is. So when we talk about God king, even though we don't relate to it, he's trying to give us examples from the history, what kings were able to do and how people were in real awe of kingship.
Right. A lot of the metaphors that we use in appreciating the relationship that we have with God, one of the relationships that we have with God is that of king and subjects. And coming up to the high holidays, we talk about God as both our father and our king, but not having an actual king like they did in the ancient days. It's hard to appreciate the magnitude of what that relationship is. So it's a nice study to be able to give us a glimpse into understanding what it means to be the King of Kings. All right. Very good. Thank you for joining, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
God willing, we will continue and see you next Thursday.